author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Has the once venerated Fourth Estate played a significant role in conning the American people? As more and more people come to believe that the President of the United States is just play-acting the role, how long will it be before the ever-supportive media have to volte-face and perhaps accidentally commit real journalism? Add this to the disconnect between what the legacy media tells us is happening and what we can see with our very own lying eyes. And what you have here is not just a failure to communicate, but rather a tipping point where the faith in the organs of state turns from disinterest to outright dislike. And where do we go from there? Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we're going to examine the state of the president's health, both physical and mental, and ask if the media can ever truly be held accountable. We'll be joined by Sarah Cowgill to discuss the revamped campaign of Georgia hopeful Stacey Abrams. We're asking the tough questions about the recent video conference between Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden, and we'll be tackling the tough cases of the week in our special Talking Liberty segment. I'd like to say a special hello to our listeners in Park Hill, Missouri on KFMO 1240 AM. Thanks for being part of the team. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. With Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Joe Biden holding a virtual meeting to discuss the future of Ukraine, watchers were wondering if the American president had the stomach for the fight. Now, although serious details of what happened are short on the ground, it doesn't take a Sherlock Holmes-style figure to parse out the spin from the concrete results. Nonetheless, we have our very own political sleuth and former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller Dave Patterson to highlight some of the more notable elements of this semi-historic quasi-summit. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Thank you very much, Mark. Happy to be here.
So, Dave, give us a brief overview of what this was all about and the current situation on the ground in Ukraine.
Well, the short answer is that Russia moved 94,300 troops to the Ukraine border, giving every indication that they had an invasion in mind and planned. But that was actually back in April. So the tension on the border has been building, and recent U.S. intelligence reports regarding increased cyber activity has simply fueled those tensions. During the Putin-Biden talks, a firefight broke out with machine gun and grenade launchers between the Ukraine ground forces and the Russian-backed separatists in the eastern region of Donetsk of Ukraine, which of course was added emphasis to the content of the meeting.
So these two world leaders met. Did they achieve anything substantive, or was it more a high-profile meeting for domestic consumption?
Well, if you listen to Jake Sullivan's Tuesday debrief following the meeting, the answer is no. Effectively, Biden said what the White House said he would say, and Putin said what the Kremlin said he would say. And so no commitments were made by either side. And I believe the press would have appreciated if some more specifics had been given over to them during that press briefing. But if laying the groundwork for additional meetings is progress, then in White House parlance, some was made. But basically, it was typical Biden White House, lots of words and no substance. As for the meeting being for domestic consumption, again, Putin met the needs of the Russian people, and Biden was diplomatically astute by liberal standards, feckless, weak, and compromising for the rest of us. And Europe, I don't think, can take any comfort from what we heard coming from that meeting.
It reminds me very much of an episode of the old British show, Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, where the Prime Minister is wanting to figure out what he's going to talk about with the foreign leader, and his diplomat, Sir Humphrey, says, no, all these things are already discussed in advance. We wouldn't let two world leaders actually figure out what needs to be talked about. So let's move on to the Nord Stream 2 for a moment. So this is the energy pipeline from Russia to Germany. And that's the big bargaining chip, I think, for Joe Biden, or so it seems. But it does seem to me that this would require German cooperation, or cooperation from the European Union as well. But in the midst of a German winter, regardless of what Vladimir Putin decides to do, I can't see any way that Joe Biden is going to force Germany to cooperate with US interests in saying no to all that gas and oil that they need.
Well, let's for a moment talk about what this Nord Stream 2 pipeline is all about. First of all, it's 750 miles from Vyborg to Russia to Lubin in Germany, through the Baltic Sea, incidentally bypassing Poland and Ukraine. Well, the pipeline would carry approximately 55 billion metric meters of natural gas to Europe. But Germany has not certified its operation. So although it's completed, it's not delivering gas. And Europe, it might be interesting to know, imports about 43% of its natural gas from Russia. So it's a big deal for Europe. Under the Trump administration, with the US having basically energy sufficiency, we could have complemented the natural gas deliveries to Europe. But under the Biden administration, that's not possible.
Okay, and one final question, please, Dave. In the Pentagon, there must be hundreds of people who war game different geopolitical scenarios and then stress test them for probability. So did the Defense Department see this coming? I mean, you mentioned that the troops were amassed there, 93,000 troops back in April. Because it seems to me that although the US government must surely have some indication here, the administration seems to be taken by surprise.
Well, whereas the administration, as a metaphor for the White House, yeah, I think they were taken by surprise. For the Pentagon, these kinds of contingencies are planned for and war-gamed, and not the specifics necessarily, but for example, I mean, you have seen a lot of folks in the Pentagon talking about the Baltics, and because they're part of NATO, we have built them up with forces, U.S. forces, and so I think that the quick answer to your question is yes, they do these kinds of war-gaming exercises.
Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark. Always happy to be with you.
Coming up later in the show, we're talking Liberty with Scott Cosenza. What's happening in the courts and how does the media coverage measure up? But next up on Liberty Nation Radio, we're speaking with the fount of knowledge of all things political, Tim Donner. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
International wranglings over Ukraine, rising inflation, and poll numbers that defy gravity. Perhaps it's time to ask if President Joe Biden is really out of his depth. Is the president fit for purpose? And if not, how likely is he to be up to the task in 1 year's time, or 2, or even 3? Well, to examine the evidence and sort fact from fiction, we're joined by longtime host of this here Liberty Nation Radio and senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Welcome back to the show, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So my first question has to be the obvious one. Despite having a huge team of DC insiders at his beck and call, Joe Biden appears completely out of his depth. Now, would you say that this is a true statement, or is the reality a little more nuanced?
Well, it would have been interesting to see, Mark, how he did before he was in cognitive decline. In other words, he ran for president twice before, in 1988 and in 2008. And it would have been interesting to see how he did that because he was very gregarious. He was very, he's high energy, was outspoken on things. He was a classic career politician. Now he seems to be a shell of what he used to be because of his cognitive decline. And Mark, I would say this, there's a reason that he bombed out the first 2 times that he ran for president. The public didn't take to it, just like Kamala Harris bombed out in her one attempt to become president. Neither one of them made it past the first primary when they ran for president, Biden and Harris. But in addition to that, Mark, Biden was never challenged in his Senate races. He was never under pressure. He doesn't know how to deal with it. He was handed the vice presidency by Barack Obama for a career that looked like it was fading into obscurity because of his own failure in 2008. Since then, it's been all downhill since 2008. I think he's never had to deal with the pressure that he now feels. He was handed, in effect, the presidency because he bombed out again in the primaries in 2020. But because the party stepped in and basically drove everyone else out of the race, he was handed the nomination, and then he was handed voting laws that were changed to the point of, airdropping unsolicited mail-in ballots. And the voting laws were so favorable that he was basically handed the presidency while he was hiding in the basement because of COVID. So this is a guy who's never had to deal with really being in charge of anything, never had to deal with the pressure. And now we can see why he failed so badly, I suppose, in his first two attempts to become president.
Yeah, a lot of people are suggesting that he's kind of choked under the pressure. Now, you wrote an article on Liberty Nation recently about some polling numbers regarding Biden's physical, and presumably this includes mental capability in doing the job as commander-in-chief. Care to give us a brief analysis on these numbers?
Well, in summary, it's shocking, Mark, that the number of people who believe that the president of the United States is healthy, up to the job, physically fit, mentally fit, is alarmingly low. And it doesn't matter whether it's Trump on the right or Biden on the left. It's not a good sign when the population of the country doesn't believe that the president is up to the job. It's a 29-point swing in the question of whether Joe Biden is healthy over the last year. Only 40% of the people in the latest Politico Morning Consult poll believe that Biden's in good health. 50% don't. And it's a 21-point reversal on the question of him being specifically mentally fit, as a majority of the people polled believe he is not mentally fit for the job. Now, this is in two recent polls, because there was another Harvard-Harris poll that also showed, incredibly, by a 5% margin, Americans believe that Joe Biden is too old to be president. Well, they knew how old he was when they voted for him. So, Mark, a lot of this is on the voters, honestly.
Well, some of it may be on the voters, but what about the media? Because it seems more than ever that the Fourth Estate, it had its 30 pieces of silver. They backed Joe Biden from the start. They ignored scandal after scandal. They buried the Hunter Biden laptop story. They poo-pooed every accusation that he was past his prime. And now we have the modern state of play in America, where even a Biden-friendly cable news network has to admit that things are not going well, which seems to be the limit of their disapproval. Now, one word that we always talk about in relation to journalism is accountability. Will the media ever be held accountable, or even hold themselves accountable for perpetrating what many rational people now seem to feel is a confidence trick?
Well, I think it was a wake-up call for the media, Mark. When the pullout from Afghanistan occurred, they couldn't believe that this guy was as incompetent as he showed himself to be with this withdrawal from Afghanistan, which, by the way, I don't think he's ever going to recover. His image, his branding is never going to recover from what happened with Afghanistan. I think they were shocked because it never occurred to them that he could be that incompetent because, of course, Mark, he's been roaming the corridors of Capitol Hill for almost 50 years. So they figured, well, he must be competent. He keeps getting elected. He was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee and all this stuff. And so they didn't give it a thought to basically throw their entire journalistic credibility away to get him elected. Of course, that was a culmination of a 4-year period in which they gave away something, Mark, they'll never be able to recover, which is their journalistic credibility. They threw it away They sacrificed it at the altar of taking down Donald Trump by whatever means availed themselves. And they succeeded at it. And I don't think it really ever occurred to him that they could be this incompetent. And no, of course, they're not going to take any accountability for it. And I think their way of assuaging their guilt is to actually, as I call it, commit journalism on the Biden administration. They're going to actually run a few stories to try and prove that they can actually cover this guy with some semblance of objectivity, which they were completely unable or unwilling to do with Donald Trump.
Final question for you, Tim, if I may. With congressional elections less than a year out, subtle campaigning and some not so subtle campaigning is underway. And now usually parties would be campaigning on their guy or their gal, depending. But it seems reality has flipped, and we're living in a topsy-turvy world where Democrats only want to talk about a Republican leader, presumably Donald Trump at this point, and Republicans only want to talk about Joe Biden. Now, is this a coming trend? Is this going to be something that do you think we see in election after election as things become so polarized?
Well, I think it depends. If you have a president that's at about the 48 to 50% approval, he becomes neither an asset or a liability. If he's in the low 40s, he's a liability. If he's above 50, he's an asset. So you use the president according to, his approval at any particular point in time. I think that the Democrats do the Republicans a big favor by talking about Donald Trump, because right now people are comparing the actual record of Donald Trump to the record of Joe Biden, which is just where Trump and Republicans want to be. They want people to compare the records, and by Democrats, and admittedly, they have nothing else to go on. They have nothing else because it's been such a disaster. The losing streak for Joe Biden has gone on since Afghanistan, and it's unbroken. So, it seems to me that all they have is to scare people about Donald Trump, but in doing so, they're going to remind people of the Donald Trump era when we had a roaring economy, low unemployment, and America was open for business, and foreign actors didn't try to take advantage of us. The direct head-to-head comparison, Mark, I think is only going to serve Trump and Republicans well.
It will be almost a battle of the Titans come 2024. Tim Donner, thank you ever so much.
Very much enjoyed it, Mark. Thanks.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. And remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation from 2 to 3 p.m. Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM, 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. Later down the road, we tackle abortion in the Supreme Court on Talking Liberty. But after this short break, we'll be right back to figure out just how confident Stacey Abrams is of winning the Georgia gubernatorial this time around. And will race and anger be at the center of her campaign? Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
She's back. The media love her. The public rejected her. Stacey Abrams, the Georgia would-be Politico, is running for governor of the Peach State once again. While she'll certainly have the backing of the Biden administration and the Fourth Estate, has anything changed that will give her a better chance at the brass ring this time around? And if they have they changed in her favor? Now, someone who's been closely following the political trajectory of Miss Abrams is Liberty Nation's national correspondent, Sarah Cowgill, who joins us now. Thanks for coming on, Sarah.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a blast with you, Mark.
Absolutely. So tell me, sir, what political volcanoes have exploded? What meteorites have struck the earth that have so changed the political landscape that Stacey Abrams believes she can win Georgia gubernatorial this time around?
Nothing's changed.
Oh dear for Miss Abrams.
Well, I think that what we're looking at here is I think the state has woke up after their disastrous 2020 controversial election, the fight, the battles, the Stacey Abrams versus Brian Kemp and the presidential election. I think the state is looking at things like, wow, we don't really want to do that. Let's not go backwards. So I actually think she's going to be in a tougher position to run and win this time around.
You mentioned in a recent article that as far as Miss Abrams is concerned, this may be her running for a second term, as she never really did get around to conceding last time. While that can be a useful tactic in the early days, especially if recounts are likely, for example, she was making these claims well into this year, wasn't she?
She hasn't ever conceded. And yes, she was still talking about it throughout the beginning of this year. She has kind of dropped that angle a little bit. But I think, she's said it enough, and people, that follow her and that enjoy her as a candidate, as a political figure, they parrot that. And so as long as they're saying it, other people are going to pick up on it, like a little social media hashtag that's going to catch fire somewhere. I think she believes in her heart of hearts that she's running for re-election. She never really lost. She never conceded to the man. And that's where she's going with this. She may not be saying it, but everybody around her is saying it.
They had to cancel the order for the 4 more years banner, I believe. So let's talk about Georgia. Since the last gubernatorial, the state, it's taken on 2 new Democrat senators. But strangely, despite all the hype that surrounded them at the time, they've kept their heads down and remained largely silent. Does this help Miss Abrams or hinder her in the race? And will 2 such, let's call them wallflower lawmakers, be willing to spend whatever political capital they've built on someone who failed to win, even when the country swung heavily away from Donald Trump?
Both of the candidates that have, risen now out of Georgia, the 2 Democrat senators, they are not bombastic personalities to begin with. Ossoff, when he ran the first time, came off like a scrawny little kid with a petulant attitude. He has obviously matured, but he is a thoughtful, more conservative Democrat than he is a radical progressive. So his normal demeanor and personality is going to be quiet. You're not going to get him lighting flags and marching and throwing out, name calling or expletives or any of those, things that have caught fire with both sides of the political aisle. He's going to be quiet. I don't believe, though, that they're feeling, confident enough to go down that totally scary left road, because they don't want to flip their state back to red. They want to keep it blue. So if they can just kind of walk that line and appease and not be in the line of fire for conservatives who have finally decided maybe they made a mistake in 2020, I think he's going to, I think both of them are going to take a little bit of a back seat in this race.
Okay, so what are the pollsters saying?
If you look at all the different polls, she's not a very popular person, except for with the media. And she is very popular in the Democratic Party. Democrats across the country love her. I don't know why, but they do. Maybe she is, the firebrand they need. Maybe she's the next coming of Hillary Clinton. I'm not really sure where they're going with it or what the attraction is. But she seems to have caught the eye also of the Fourth Estate, obviously. But the polls have her pretty much in a statistical heat today. And again, we're 10 months out of an election. So anything can happen between now and next November. But, if you're looking at how things are going to go down the road away, we're way early. But today she's in basically what we would call a statistical heat with Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp's got his own problems. So not only is he, going to fight for his reelection, which would be a real reelection, but he's got a big fight on his hands. He does not have a lot of friends in the Republican Party.
Okay, one more question for you, Sarah, for me. Now, do we have any indication of what Miss Abrams will be campaigning on? And if so, will it just be a rehash of her former unsuccessful campaign or successful campaign, depending on who you believe?
Yes. Well, no.
Yes and no.
Yes. Well, no. I don't know. Let me reverse that whole out the pie hole knee-jerk reaction. Yes, she is going to talk about redistricting and gerrymandering. Yes, she's going to talk about racial disparity. Those things are front and center in voting rights. Those are is her three-pronged stool that she rides on or sits on or stands on or whatever she does with her three prongs. But the thing that's not in this election is Donald Trump. So they've got to drop that. They've got to drop that bully, meanie, whatever, because Brian Kemp is not even in Trump's radar anymore. So there is no tying Donald Trump to this election.
Yeah, I think that's somewhere that Terry McAuliffe went wrong, is he ran on precisely those issues, as it were, voting rights, redistricting, race, things like that. But he also threw, despite trying to pull back on it several months into the campaign, he also put Donald Trump into the mix. And that's not something that we are likely to see in Georgia. So, Sarah Cowgill, thank you ever so much for being here.
It's always a pleasure, Mark.
Don't go anywhere. It's all abuzz in the Supreme Court, and political power plays are afoot, right here on Liberty Nation Radio. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
All the stories driving the media narrative seem to be taking place in the American courts, whether it's Ghislaine Maxwell, Jussie Smollett, abortion questions in the Supreme Court, or Biden's vaccine mandates being knocked back again and again. The spotlight is firmly on the judiciary. And there's no one better placed to cast away the shadows than host of the excellent Uprising podcast, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, and man about town, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. Welcome back to Talking Liberty, Scott.
Mark, prognosticating about the courts is my business, and business is good.
It keeps us in bread and butter, doesn't it? Now, Scott, can you give us a brief overview of what significant cases or questions that have been tackled by the courts this week? Ones that have specifically piqued your interest as a constitutional lawyer, specifically those that had your liberty-minded spidey sense twitching.
Mark, I think that I've been reading more than anything else this week about the reaction to the Supreme Court's abortion case that they heard last week. And there's so much out there that says that the Supreme Court has signaled that they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. I think that it's particularly amusing, what is the people's record who are reading these signals? I think that the justices were hostile to the pro-choice case generally, and that's fair reporting to suggest that. But to then suggest that you can then translate that into where they're going to rule. I don't think that anybody has a track record on that, on judging those signals that can be relied upon. I know that I myself don't. There's one or two justices who I think we can firmly predict where their votes are going to lie, and the rest of them, we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, it seems more to me that those who are trying to explain which direction the court's going to jump, they're like the guys with bits of string and pins all around their apartments linking JFK and the moon landings. Now, it seems
the other thing that we have to consider, and I have to remind myself to do it, so I suspect everybody else does too, is to what the fundraising goals are of the people who are crowing about this are. So both on the pro-life and the pro-choice side, and certainly the pro-choicers are going to make a mint off of the speculation that they need the money to counter somehow this idea that Roe is going away.
Those emails are already landing in inboxes as we speak. Now, it seems that the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, rather than lasting the anticipated 6 weeks that was first prompted, it's about to come to a conclusion after just 2. Now, I think this surprises many of us. So what could prompt such a dramatic shift in the timetabling, Scott?
The only thing that makes sense to me, Mark, is that the prosecution thinks that they have proved their case sufficiently and that more evidence that they might present would not help prove their case, but may tend to weaken the case. That's sort of the only thing that really stands to reason as to why they would do that. They said to the court they thought 5 to 6 weeks for the presentation of their witnesses and evidence, and to pare it back so drastically, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's the best I can come up with. I told somebody else, Mark, that I'm not saying there's a conspiracy in place. I'm just saying that if you were doing a conspiracy to keep the public in the dark about this trial, that's exactly how it's being undertaken. I have never before in my history as a law student, as a lawyer, or as a journalist concerning legal issues, seen a court case that was more shrouded in secrecy than the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. It is remarkable. The witnesses, the exhibits, the testimony, all behind the closed doors and huddled conferences with nary a public view to be seen.
Well, we do fortunately get the crayon painted pictures that come out of the court. Now, it could, as you say.
Well, hold on, just if I might comment on that, Mark. Literally, the judge said, and I don't recall her name. I'm sorry to say, but the judge said to the courtroom artist, "Be sure and skew the details of the witnesses." So we don't even have accurate courtroom sketches of the witnesses who've been testifying. They're purposefully obscured or designed to conceal the person's identity rather than reveal what they look like.
But I think to your earlier point about the prosecution wanting to finish on a high note, as it were, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, let's briefly jump on to another topic that I'm sure many of our listeners and watchers are keen to hear about. It's the report came in that President Joe Biden commissioned that he initially asked for when he was then candidate Joe Biden into what can be done about the Supreme Court. Now, this report came out, and while it offers no concrete recommendations because that wasn't the remit, the burden of the weight seems to be against packing the Supreme Court. And I want to quote a brief excerpt here, Scott. Quote, "No serious person in either major political party suggests court packing as a means of overturning disliked Supreme Court decisions." End quote. Now, that's not quite true, is it, Scott? I've heard plenty of politicos say that court packing isn't the way forward. So is this report really just taking a sly knock at those who do, or are they saying that the politicians that do, which include many notable names, are not serious persons?
I would hope that it means the latter, but I don't necessarily think that it does. I read the report, and that section that you quote from is not language from the commissioners or whatever we call the members of the committee. I guess they are commissioners, but they're quoting from an academic who wrote some years prior. So it's not a nothing, but it's also not quite as bad as them saying it themselves. I think that there's very few of the commissioners likely who were proponents of packing the court, and that's why that language is in there, and that the report generally skews to denigrating the idea of adding justices to the court to either compensate for St. Merrick Garland's non-hearing that the left seems to be
the hearing that never was,
and also that Donald Trump was successfully able to appoint 3 justices to the Supreme Court.
So where does this go from here? I mean, they haven't made any concrete recommendations, but of the let's call it the subtle pointers that are inherent within the report. It's clear that court packing is not something that they would recommend. It's not something that they view as pointed out by the quote, as a serious option. And yet, with the report's release, we're having notable Democrats already saying, well, it's clear that we've got to pack the courts. Where's the disconnect?
Mark, if I wear my strictly political hat, I would say that the smart move for those who wish to pack the court, and I think that's a bad idea on a number of levels. But if I did think so, I would say wait till the court rules in the Jackson Women's Health case, the abortion case that may overturn Roe. And if the court rules to overturn Roe, then I think you can have a more powerful political message to pack the court. In fact, I think it might be widely successful because there's so much really kind of free press on the positive Roe side. All of the big box media, legacy media sources and stories start off with the presumption that Roe is a good case, it's good for the country, and when they report about its potential demise, it's done so with condolences and consternation, not, gee, we're moving into a better direction without the burden of a bad case like Roe on the books.
Now, I think just to carry on with this court packing element here, I think a lot of people are a bit confused that I mean, I certainly am. How this would work in practice, because let's just say, for example, that, as you point out, let's say that the Supreme Court does rule against Jackson's women's health and Roe is essentially gutted. So now Joe Biden puts up some kind of constitutional amendment. Well, the Congress puts up some kind of constitutional amendment that expands how many justices can sit a bench. But then there's a 50-50 split in the Senate.
Let me just stop you right there. There needs to be no constitutional amendment to address the number of justices. The number of justices is not set in the Constitution. It's simply a matter of providing it under federal law and authorizing the payment of the salary, and then appointing and confirming the justice. And that's all that's required. There need be no constitutional amendment.
Okay, so that's really the element one to look at, the appointment and confirmation of the would-be justices. How do they hope to do that when it's literally just Kamala Harris has the swing vote in the Senate?
Well,
and could it very easily backfire? Could it be that they put this into place and then the Republicans take control of the Senate in the 2022 congressionals, and then they could pack the court how they wish?
That's possible. The Republicans couldn't pack the court without an executive who would nominate a prospect that they like. So
those seats
certainly
could
not
sit
likely to
empty
happen
until there's another Republican
president.
Right.
And here's the other thing that you may not be considering, which is that if the court does overturn Roe, there are many people in the United States. I spoke with LibertyNation.com senior political analyst Tim Donner about this on the Uprising podcast last week when I posed the question to him. You know, we have a lot of swing voters, these suburban women, especially voters in purpley kind of areas who, when the economy is going bad under the direction of Democrats who are spending and taxing, they are more inclined to vote Republican. But on the social issues, they tend to more favor Democrats. And these people are generally neither hardcore pro-abortion or anti-abortion folks. But if they're able to be convinced that, you know, the Republicans are coming for women's bodies and with the handmaiden tale stuff and all that, then I don't think that, you know, it's wise to presume that the Congress would be so populated as you postulated with your hypothetical. I think it's more likely that there will be significant gains in Democrat seats in the Congress. In fact, I think that the best thing that could happen to the Democrats electorally is for the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. That would, I think, really just be a huge boon to electing Democrats in the Congress.
Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
And that wraps it up for this week's foray into all things liberty. I'd like to say thank you to our esteemed guests, David Patterson, Tim Donner, Sarah Cowgill, and the constitutional uncaped crusader, Scott Cosenza. And of course, extend my sincere gratitude to you, the listeners, for taking the time to join us here on Liberty Nation Radio. A final thought to leave you with. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote, "You only have power over people as long as you don't take everything away from them. But when you've robbed a man of everything, he's no longer in your power. He's free again." This is something our political leaders of all stripes should be wary of. When we lose the ability to work and provide for our families, to communicate freely without fear of retribution, be that societal or governmental, what does that leave us with besides our innate thirst for freedom? As governments around the world meet to discuss global cooperation standards, without input from the people, I might add, we may be coming to a point where the people are left with little but their own dignity. And woe betide any authority that tries to take that away. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.